My aunt said I'd never be anything without her help. So, I bought her business and fired her publicly. From the moment I could string ambition into full sentences, she was already there, cutting the cord before I had time to finish a thought. My aunt, the so-called queen of commerce, wore success like armor and arrogance like perfume. You couldn't breathe around her without inhaling the sharp scent of her self-importance. To the outside world, she was a visionary, the woman who built an empire from scratch, who turned a boutique into a chain, who out-talked executives and turned every handshake into a conquest. But to me, she was a constant reminder that generosity can be laced with venom. "Without me, you'd be nothing," she'd say, smiling as if it were a compliment. It didn't matter if I was 17 or 27. She repeated it with the same cadence each time I came to her with a new idea. I remember showing her my first product concept, a minimalist tech organizer with modular design. She didn't even glance at it. Just sipped her tea, cocked her head, and said, "Stick to school. You're not built for this world." Then she laughed, the kind of dismissive chuckle that tastes like rust when you're on the receiving end. I kept coming back at first, not because I needed validation, though maybe I did back then, but because there was still a flicker of belief that somewhere beneath the serrated edges of her words, she cared. Each time I asked for advice, she gave it with a side of condescension, holding her insights like sacred scripture I was lucky to receive. And when I took her suggestions and turned them into action, she always made sure to remind me it was her influence, not my effort, that mattered. Still, I watched her closely. I learned more from her than she ever realized, not in the way she intended, not through mentorship or encouragement, but by witnessing the cracks in her throne. I saw how she treated employees like they were beneath her, how she burned bridges with partners over petty control. I observed her tantrums disguised as leadership, her fear of innovation, her refusal to adapt. She was a queen obsessed with her crown, blind to the rot growing beneath her kingdom, so I built in silence. While she mocked my late nights, I sketched prototypes under flickering lamps. While she laughed at my failed pitches, I refined my strategy, streamlined my model, developed systems she couldn't even pronounce. I took every failed conversation, every backhanded insult, and added it to my blueprint. My first launch didn't make headlines, but it paid for itself in 6 months. My second opened international doors. By the time I secured my third investor, I had stopped thinking about her completely, until her name popped up in a finance article titled "The Fall of a Fashion Titan." It wasn't a dramatic collapse. No lawsuits, no scandals, but something worse for someone like her. Slow irrelevance, poor inventory decisions, outdated branding, and an ego too bloated to see the shift in consumer behavior. She tried to pivot, but her efforts reeked of desperation. Collaborations that didn't fit, marketing that landed like a thud. She was a dinosaur in a digital age, roaring louder while sinking deeper. And there I was, no longer the forgotten niece, but the quiet threat lurking beneath the surface. My team brought the acquisition idea to me, half joking, thinking I'd laugh it off. But I didn't. I stared at the numbers, studied the staff roster, analyzed the potential. It wasn't just viable, it was poetic. I didn't need revenge, but I wasn't going to ignore the opportunity to flip the narrative, to reclaim the air she once tried to choke me in. She didn't see it coming. My name wasn't listed in the front-facing documents. I let the lawyers play the game while I stayed behind the curtain, watching as she fumbled through another failed campaign. She thought a new logo would save her. She thought her name still carried weight. And then the meeting was called. Her office, a space once soaked in intimidation and impossible standards, had a different energy that morning. Her staff, once trained to laugh at her sarcasm and nod at her cruelty, sat in tense silence. The new board, quietly introduced, took their seats. She walked in late, as always, assuming it would be another desperate strategy session. She didn't recognize me at first, not dressed in muted black with my nameplate gleaming silver across the folder in my hands. She made some snide remark about the intern-looking guest before her voice hitched. I didn't waste time. I slid the folder across the table. She opened it. Eyes scanned quickly, then frantically. And just like that, the color drained from her face. The termination letter sat neatly on top. Legal, binding, absolute. She tried to speak, voice rising in that familiar pitch of performance, the victim script already cued in her throat. But I didn't flinch. "I hope your next venture thrives," I said calmly, standing while she still fumbled for dignity. "You taught me a lot about what not to be." She called it a betrayal, called the staff cowards, demanded loyalty, but they'd already seen too much. They were tired of clapping for a queen who never listened to her court. One by one, they turned away, and I left her in that office, surrounded by the ghosts of her own ego. Later, I heard she was applying for consulting roles, trying to rebrand as a thought leader. Her resume floated around in circles where I was keynote speaker, where my face was on the banners and her name only came up in cautionary tales. She used Wi-Fi from a cafe that was sponsored by my company. Her world had shrunk into a caricature of what it once was. People asked what happened to her. I just smiled, not bitter, not smug. She helped me, I say, every time. Just not the way she thinks. And though the story isn't over yet, one thing is already clear. She built a business to be remembered. I built an empire to never be forgotten. There's a strange silence that follows a public downfall. It's not the kind that hums with pity or softens the edges with sympathy. It's a silence that isolates, thick and suffocating, like the air after a thunderstorm where everything's been torn apart, but nothing's yet begun to heal. My aunt learned that silence intimately in the weeks following her exit. The headlines didn't scream, but they whispered. Whispers, after all, are more deadly in circles where reputation is currency. Industry chatter branded her as the cautionary tale, a case study in arrogance and ossified ambition. But the truth? Her fall wasn't just about a changing market or shifting trends. It was her own stubborn refusal to evolve. She had clung so tightly to her crown that she'd broken the throne beneath it. While she obsessed over being seen as irreplaceable, she'd trained no successor, cultivated no loyalty, and burned every bridge she didn't personally build. And I had been the one quietly studying those ruins. After I assumed full control of her former business, now rebranded, revitalized, and merged into a larger ecosystem of my design, I didn't just gut her empire for parts, I remade it. From the ground up. The name she had so proudly plastered on every storefront, every shipping label, every invoice, gone, replaced by a sleek new brand identity, minimalist but magnetic, the kind of logo that made people double take without realizing why. My team doubled within the first quarter. We launched campaigns that reached markets she never understood, spoke to demographics she'd long ignored. I invested in talent she would have laughed out of the interview room. Young, hungry, diverse, unpolished but brilliant. I gave them resources, not ridicule. Their ideas? They shattered the outdated molds she had spent years forcing people into. And the results? Profit margins she could have only dreamed of. My inbox filled with press requests. Investors who once worshipped her called me directly. And through it all, she said nothing. Until she did. It began with a message, short, passive-aggressive, like a ghost knocking softly against a locked door. "I hope you're enjoying the house I built." I didn't respond, because the truth was, I'd bulldozed the house. She just didn't recognize the blueprint anymore. But silence has a weight of its own, and my refusal to play into her narrative seemed to pull something darker from her. Over the next few weeks, she tried to claw her way back into the conversation. She posted cryptic throwbacks online, photos from her peak, interviews from a decade ago, trying to remind people of who she used to be. She released a podcast episode filled with half-truths and veiled insults, the kind of public whining disguised as wisdom that seasoned listeners could see through in a heartbeat. Still, I let her talk, because I had a deeper plan, something longer, more permanent than a single power move. While she grasped at relevance, I was building something global. I expanded beyond fashion and product. I moved into tech partnerships, social ventures, global art installations. My name wasn't just attached to a brand, it was the brand. I was no longer the niece, I was the architect. Then came the awards season. I was nominated and winning for entrepreneurial excellence, innovation in leadership, global equity initiatives. Events she used to host now invited me as the keynote. I stood on stages where she once dismissed me, accepted awards in front of audiences that had once only applauded her. And at one event, there she was, far in the back, dressed in a borrowed confidence, smiling with lips that didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't an honoree. She was a +1, a shadow. Our eyes met for a second. She didn't smile. Neither did I. I gave my speech without once referencing the past, because when you've outgrown someone's legacy, you don't need to dance on the ashes. You just build taller towers. After that night, things changed. She stopped reaching out, stopped posting. I heard she was moving. Some small town 2 states over where she'd open a boutique again, hoping the name carried further than it did here. But here, she was finished. Her name, once feared, once revered, was now an afterthought in conversations that moved far beyond her narrow worldview. And while she faded, I thrived. But I didn't forget. There were moments. Late nights after a campaign launch, early mornings before a flight, standing in my penthouse overlooking a skyline I now shaped, where I thought about the girl I used to be, the one sitting across from her at that oversized desk, pitching dreams like fragile things, only to be told I was soft, that I didn't have the edge, that no one would take me seriously without her blessing. And now, people couldn't not take me seriously. I didn't just prove her wrong. I redefined what right looked like, yet I didn't celebrate her downfall with glee. Because deep down, I knew what stung her most wasn't the loss of money or staff or title. It was losing the narrative. The realization that her greatest pupil had outperformed the teacher, not through vengeance, but through vision. One evening, I received a letter, a real one, envelope, wax seal, handwritten. It was from her. She wrote that she didn't expect forgiveness, that watching me now was like looking at something both familiar and alien. She acknowledged her cruelty. She said she used fear as a shield because deep down she always knew I'd surpass her, and she didn't know how to love something that threatened her relevance. I read it twice, then folded it, slid it into a drawer, and locked it. Because some apologies are admissions, not transformations, and I had already moved on. The story wasn't over, not yet. There were still new industries to break into, more barriers to tear down. I had become the very thing she told me I could never be, not despite her, but because of every door she slammed. And now, those same doors, they open at the sound of my name. There comes a point where even legacy stops mattering, not because it isn't real, not because it didn't shape the road behind, but because you've built something so far beyond the map that the old names, the old insults, the old scars, they lose weight. They become echoes in corridors you no longer walk. I stood on the top floor of my headquarters, 12 stories above the city skyline, watching the pulse of lights flicker below like a living constellation. The building was new, but the journey etched into every corner felt ancient. My name was engraved on the glass entrance, branded into the lobby wall in bold, backlit steel. The office buzzed below me with quiet, efficient brilliance. Young minds and sharp voices, pushing boundaries, rewriting playbooks. A machine powered not by fear, but by purpose. And somewhere far beneath that glow, in a part of the city that still clung to old names and faded storefronts, was her, my aunt, the woman who used to say I'd never be anything without her. The same woman who once looked down at me from behind a walnut desk, now forgotten in the wake of something she couldn't grasp. She had opened her boutique again, I'd heard. Smaller this time, humble, tucked between a dry cleaner and a vape shop, her glory days reduced to clearance racks and hastily stapled sale signs. People barely walked in. But I didn't feel sorry for her. She had written her own script, carved her own downfall, believing that power was control, not responsibility. She thought influence meant ownership of others' success, that helping someone entitled her to their story. But she was wrong. She was wrong about business. She was wrong about leadership. And most of all, she was wrong about me. That morning, I received an email from her lawyer, a single-line subject, asset liquidation proposal. I didn't open it right away. I knew what it meant. Her store, her last grasp at relevance, was on its final leg. The numbers weren't sustainable. She was looking to sell. Again. But this time there would be no dramatic boardroom reveal, no printed letter slid across her desk, no gasps or whispers from staff. That moment had already happened. This was something else. I went to see the place one last time, not to taunt her, not even to say goodbye, just to see for myself the hollow shell that had once been her empire. The shop was quiet. Demain sans. A few mannequins stood awkwardly in the window, dressed in dated styles, dusty from neglect. Inside, racks hung like skeletons. No customers. Just her. She was at the counter, sorting receipts with a kind of fragile dignity, like a queen still trying to hold court over a crumbling kingdom. When she looked up and saw me, her expression didn't flinch. She didn't offer a greeting. Just paused, eyes meeting mine, everything unsaid swelling in the air between us. "You got the offer," she said. I nodded. "I assume you'll decline." I stepped closer, letting the silence stretch just enough. "No," I said. "I'll buy it, but not for the name. I'll tear it down, gut it, start fresh." A flicker of defiance passed over her face, quickly buried beneath exhaustion. I figured. She didn't argue, didn't plead, and I didn't gloat. Because it was done. The war was over. No more chess games, no more second chances. "I'm not your enemy," I added, not out of mercy, but because it was the truth. "I never was." She laughed, soft and bitter. "No," she said, "but I made you one." She handed me the keys without ceremony. There was no speech, no apology beyond the one she had written in that letter I still kept locked away, and I didn't offer redemption. That wasn't mine to give. I left the store in silence, the bell over the door chiming behind me like the final note of a long, dissonant song. Within a month, the place was gone. The building was leveled. Construction started on a new space, an incubator for young entrepreneurs, especially women of color. A space where dreams wouldn't be mocked or measured by pedigree, where no one would ever hear the phrase, "You'll never be anything without me." The press asked about the acquisition. I gave them the truth, clean and unpolished. She once told me I'd never succeed without her, so I made sure no one else would ever have to hear that again. They called it poetic justice. They called it brutal. But I didn't care for the labels. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even closure. It was just the final transaction. I moved forward. My company expanded internationally. We entered sectors she never touched. Education, healthcare, technology, sustainability. I wasn't just a business owner anymore, I was a movement. I was a symbol of defiance done right. Proof that you can rise without climbing on broken backs, that you can win without replicating the harm that shaped you. Years passed. Awards collected dust. Interviews turned into archives. My name became part of case studies, taught in universities, spoken in boardrooms as an example not of survival, but of evolution. And her? She faded into the margins. Last I heard, she retired completely, moved to the coast, lives quietly. Sometimes people still recognize her, ask about what happened. She gives them whatever version of the story helps her sleep. But I don't need her to tell it right, because my life now speaks for itself. There is nothing left to prove, no war left to win, no shadow left to outrun. And when people ask how I did it, how I went from being dismissed to being undeniable, I tell them this. The world doesn't get to define you by who doubted you, only by who you became in spite of them. I became everything she said I couldn't be.